And here's the thing. We all want to figure out the big answers to our big questions, like, what does God want from my life? What's the plan? Just tell me and I'll do it. But God's will never comes that way. Jesus says it like this: those who are faithful in really small things, I will give them the big stuff. God's will for you is to become the kind of person who says, whatever I'm going to do for you. And if you're wrong, He'll correct you, like GPS. What's God's will for you? It's not some big master plan that you've got to figure out, and if you get it wrong, you've missed the bus. That's not it. What does God will? What does God want from you? He wants what everybody who loves anybody wants. He wants you to do whatever it is you're doing as best as you can for Him. He wants you to be the kind of person who says, what I'm about to do, I'm going to do for you. And we've got a billion opportunities to do that in our small little decisions. I want to start with a question. Reading the Bible, what do you think is the first thing the Bible says about God? He created the universe? Yeah? What do you think? The light? Yes, we're getting warmer, brighter. Yeah. Before all else, God is. I think we can deduce that from the text for sure. What does God do? He creates. How does He do it? Yeah, the first thing that the Bible says about God is that He speaks. That's what He does. And when He speaks, it's powerful and good things happen. And if we're going to talk about discernment, if somebody like you or somebody like me is going to come to a retreat, what we're trying to believe and what we're trying to feel is the first thing that the Bible believes about God. He speaks. And when He talks, it's powerful and it's about something good. And let me tell you something that I feel as somebody who's been a priest for a long time now. I can read the Bible and they're full of God's words. We say that, the word of the Lord, and that's important. And we hear about saints, or maybe, our abuelitos or our parents, they're prayerful religious people. And they say their prayers and it seems like God talks to them. But I'll tell you this, I've been a priest for a long time. And when I pray, I can read the Bible, I can accept that God talks, but it never really feels like He talks to me. And I've got all kinds of reasons, because I don't feel holy enough, because I've got other things going on, because it's hard for me to focus and feel connected to God when I pray. But if we're going to talk about discernment, if you take one thing away from your weekend here, it's the belief that the first and most important thing that we can say about God is He's a talker. God is somebody who speaks, who wants to speak to somebody like you and to somebody like me. And I think the hardest thing to believe might be that God has something important to say to me. I can actually hear it, and it's something good. There are, we could say, okay, well, God talks. Like, what does He say? I want to talk to you about 3 questions that God asks in the Bible and suggest that those are the 3 questions we need to do discernment. Does anybody know what the first thing God says in the Bible, like the first thing in quotations? Does anybody know? What's the first thing God says to man? Yeah. Nope. Yes, but He's talking to the light. The first thing He says to Adam, the first conversation He has with a human being. No, you're getting close. What's the first thing God says? Victor? Where are you? Yeah, this is the first question that God asks Adam, and it's the first question God always asks. It's the first discernment question. where are you? And let me tell you what I mean. Like, if we're going to try to figure out what does God want from me, what should I do, what's the right thing here, the first question I have to ask myself is, where am I? Which means, like, what am I feeling? You know, what's happening to me right now that's really important? What are the things that are making me angry, sad, ashamed, alone, uncertain, happy? If I'm going to ask, what does God want from me? I first have to ask, what am I experiencing right now? Like, what is it like for me, Father Mike, to be me? Because when God talks to Adam, when God talks to us, that's the first thing he wants to talk about. Hey, how are you doing? Like, what's going on with you? What matters to you? We won't hear God's voice if we don't think about God first as somebody who wants to know what's up with you. And that's something worth knowing. The second thing God says, this is point number 2 for discernment. Does anybody know what it is? The story is Adam and Eve. What's the second thing God says in his conversation? Anybody have an idea? Victor, yo. They ate from the apple, and then what did God say? Aha! What do you guys think? Victor, what did he say? Yeah, I know, but I got you, bro. Well, hey, what's up? What you wearing? Nope, wrong. Totally wrong. What do you think? Why are you hiding? Getting closer? What do you think? What have you done? No. So we're told that Adam hears God coming. He's kind of embarrassed, because he ate the fruit and he wasn't supposed to. And so he hears God walking around and he's like, oh, shoot. So he hides. And when God finds him, he says, why did you hide? Essentially. He says, well, I was naked and blah, blah, blah. And so it's like, who told you that you were naked? That's question number 2. And it has something to do with what do other people say about you? That's the second big conversation that God has with us. What do other people say? If I want to know what God says to me, I first have to think about, what do other people say? What have my parents said to me? About what I should be like, about what I should want, what I shouldn't want, whether I'm a good person or a bad person. What do my friends tell me about what is or isn't okay, what I should be like, what is or isn't cool for me? If I want to ask the question, what does God say? How do I discern? I first got to realize, my phone is always blowing up. Everybody, Ralph, the seminarian, is always hitting me up on my Insta, and or he's like Snapchatting me and all of that. If I'm going to listen for God's voice, I have to start by identifying the other voices. What do people say, and what does that make me feel? I've had the opportunity to talk to people, like 2,000 people at a time. And they'll all come out and they'll be like, oh my God, Father, that was great. That was wonderful. Oh, Father, thank you for your words. One person will be like, I thought that was stupid. And I go home and I don't think about those 1,999 people. I think about that one fool who told me that I was stupid. And it's hard to listen for God's voice when we don't take a minute and ask, what are other people saying about me and about what is important and what isn't important? And what do I think about that? If we're going to discern, we've got to ask, where am I? What's going on with me? What do I feel? What's important to me right now? And 2, what are other people saying about me? What are other people saying about what I should do, what I should think, what I should feel? We got to know that if we're going to listen for God's voice. Number 3, this is an important question. We're going to skip when John, you remember there's 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. When he writes his Gospel, his story about being a disciple, he kind of remembers the story of Adam and Eve, which we've been talking about. And the first thing that Jesus says, does anybody know for John what's the first thing that Jesus says? Any guesses? What do you think? You're just chilling. He sees his disciples, they all showed up, like you guys all showed up. And he asked them, what do you want? He says, what are you looking for? if we're going to ask the question, what does God want me to do with my life? The first thing we have to know is, what do I want? Like, what do I really want? Out of my family, out of my school, what do I like to do? What's important to me? 3 questions that somebody has to ask if they're going to discern God's will. What is my experience? Like, where am I? What do I feel? What's happening with me right now? What do other people say about life, about what's important about me? And then what do I say about what I want, what matters to me, what I would like my life to be? A lot of times when people think about discerning God's will, they think it's all about, I've got to figure out whatever it is God wants for me. But that's not exactly right. That's not how Jesus does it. Jesus starts discernment by saying, I want to know what you want. And so when you pray, when you think about your life, that's an important question to ask. I think one of the hardest things for us sometimes is to trust our noble and good desires and our good intentions, because God speaks in our good desires, our good intentions. I'll tell you a story. When I was 18, 19 years old, I just joined the seminary and I wanted to be a priest. And the Bishop Wigan, invited me and a couple of other guys to his house for dinner. And I was 19 years old. I was scared. I was nervous. And it was dark in the house, so I was going to open up his blinds, and the blinds have those little sticks that you twist and they open. And I broke the stick off. And I was like, are we recording this? I was like, yeah. Because now, so I'm trying to hold it up, and he's like, we can edit this, yeah? Yeah. So I was like, I broke the bishop's window. It was like my first day. For sure, I'm never going to be a priest. And he looked at me and he says, Mike. I was like, here we go. He says, do you want to be holy? And I was like, what? I was like, yeah, for sure I do. I really, really do right now. He says, well, good, because listen to what Jesus said. He said, blessed are those who want to be holy. He said, if you want to be holy, you're already blessed. And I've always thought about that. Think about the good desires, the good hopes, the good plans, the noble things that you have. I want to be holy. I want to be a good friend. I want to be a better sibling. I want to whatever. Because listen to what Jesus says, when you want good things, you're already blessed. So those are, for me, important things I've thought about. Now let me give you a couple of images and then give you a couple of pieces of advice. First, I've been sharing this with Mr. Tranchi over here and a couple of others. I'm thinking about getting a tattoo right across my neck here. And it's a tattoo in Latin. It's a made-up word. Do you remember what it is, Ralph? This-ness, yeah. In Latin, it's Haecceitas, and Haecceitas is a word in Latin that means this-ness, and it comes from an old philosopher, and he described it like this: Haecceitas is the property of every created thing to be what it is and not something else. What he meant by that, Tranchi, and this is painful for me to say it, but you are exactly what God had in mind when He made you. Yeah, I know. It just hurts. It hurts. But that's what it means. If we believe, and I do believe it, that God has a plan for you, then we have to believe something first. You're exactly what God had in mind when He made you. And there will never be a day when God looks down from heaven and says, gosh, I wish you were more like this other person. That's just not going to happen. It's hard for us, gentlemen, to look in the mirror in the morning and be like, that guy's exactly what God had in mind. You know what I mean? Because we've got pain and we have doubts about ourselves and we feel unholy and, we feel depressed and all kinds of stuff. And sometimes we're not all that interested in God. We have to start with the belief. You're exactly the person you're supposed to be, because that's the person that God's choosing, with your strengths, with your weaknesses, with your hopes, with what makes you happy, with what makes you sad. That's what God is speaking to, choosing. And I think it's one of the hardest things for us to believe. You're what God had in mind. And if God says anything to you at all, let it be that. The second tattoo I'm going to get, this is a longer one. And I'm thinking of getting it, it's kind of like wrap around here. And it's a concept that came from a Catholic thinker, and he called that concept the supernatural existential. That would be a cool little tattoo, supernatural existential. And what he meant by that was there's no place, there's no time, there's no experience you could have, no relationship you can have from which God is absent. There's no memory, no experience, no person, no moment in your life when you can say God is not here. There's never a time when you can't turn to God immediately and hear him say, I love you, and there's nothing I would not do for you. And what we're trying to figure out is, how are we going to say, well, I love you too, and this is what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to be a priest. I'm going to do the right thing right now. I'm going to whatever. We won't discern anything until we learn to believe the supernatural existential. There's no place, there's no time, there's nobody who can say, Lord, wherever you are, you're not here. Not possible. There's never a time when God is not saying, I love you, and there's nothing that I'm not willing to do for you. Because if we can hear that voice talking to us, we can learn to say that too. God, I love you too, or I want to. And I want to do good things for you. Discernment is about trying to have this conversation with God. And having that conversation starts with hearing it first. You get me? Sort of. One more image and then a couple of pieces of advice. I had a very good friend, Father Pascal. Father Pascal was a Benedictine monk up at Mount Angel. Some of you seminarians are studying there. And he was a really, really good friend. I remember I went up to the seminary and was like 18 or 19 years old. And I had moved away from home for the first time. I was like 500 miles away from everybody I'd ever known in my life. They just dropped me off in college and left, and I was alone. I didn't know if I was going to have any friends. All those people were like looking like creepers, just walking around. It wasn't my vibe. That wasn't where I came from. And so I saw this guy, Father Pascal, and I was like, hey, will you hear my confession? And he said, okay. And so we sit down and we're talking, and I gave him the list of all my sins, all the things that I thought God would be worried about. And in the end, I just threw in, it's like, oh, and by the way, I don't have any friends. And he just started weeping, and he looked at me and said, Mike, that is your confession. And that's what God cares about, because it's what matters to you. It's where you're living. And that's where we meet God and hear his voice. And so, in any case, Father Pascal died about 8 years ago, cancer. And we were driving one day, and he told me just like flat out, he goes, hey, Mike, I'm dying. And I was like, oh, okay. Are you afraid? And he looked at me, and he goes, no, I'm not afraid. And I'm not going to say to God, God, I never failed you. I had no doubts, no shame, no pain. I'm not going to say it was always easy for me to pray. I'm not going to say I never got angry. He said, I'm not afraid because I'm going to say to the Lord, Lord, I'm yours. I belong to you. I've always been yours. So take what's always been yours. How could you not? And what I want to say about figuring out your vocation, figuring out what do you want to do with your life? What do we do when we get older? What's God asking of me? What's God asking of you? It's like we've got to start asking the question, what do I think belonging to God looks like? Like what does that feel like for me? What do I have to do so that I can say to God, what I'm doing for you. And here's the thing. We all want to figure out the big answers to our big questions, like what does God want from my life? What's the plan? Just tell me and I'll do it. But God's will never comes that way. Jesus says it like this: those who are faithful in really small things, I will give them the big stuff. God's will for you is to become the kind of person who says, whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to do for you. And if you're wrong, he'll correct you, like GPS. What's God's will for you? It's not some big master plan that you've got to figure out, and if you get it wrong, you've missed the bus. That's not it. What does God will? What does God want from you? He wants what everybody who loves anybody wants. He wants you to do whatever it is you're doing as best as you can for Him. He wants you to be the kind of person who says, what I'm about to do, I'm going to do for you. And we've got a billion opportunities to do that in our small little decisions. So that's the advice that I would give to you. I want to tell you a quick story and then leave you with a thought. I was telling Alejandro, I was in the seminary for like 13 years. It took me just forever. Because I left, I lived in a monastery for a while. They didn't want me. So I left. I came back to the seminary, and after a while, they're like, yeah, you're too immature. So I got kicked out. And then I thought to myself, well, gosh, 9 years I've been doing this. I want to be a priest. Twice now they've told me no. And a buddy of mine who's a priest, he called me, and he said, Mike, what are you doing? I was like, I'm at Olive Garden. He goes, you like Italian food, huh? He's like, you want to go to Rome next week? And I was like, sure. So like a week later, Olive Garden, I was in Rome, and I was like astounded. He got me a ticket, sent a car to pick me up from the Vatican. And now suddenly I'm standing in St. Peter's Square, which is a place I'd heard about but never been, and I didn't expect to be there. And so I'm standing there, I'm just astounded. I'm here in Rome, and an image flashed in my head from the Bible where Peter kind of got kicked out too. St. Peter, like he failed in a big way. He denied that he ever knew Jesus and all that kind of stuff. And Jesus says to him, Peter, I've prayed for you that your faith won't fail you. And when you do come back to me, you have to strengthen your brothers. And for me, that was a moment of discernment or vocation. I knew what my life was going to be about. It was going to be about doing what I can to strengthen my brothers, to strengthen my sisters. And I was like, okay, well, what's the best way for me to do that as a dad, as a this, as a that? And it was, for me, it was priesthood. So the discernment question I would ask you to think about is, what does your life have to look like so that you can do the most you can to strengthen your brothers, to strengthen your sisters? I went back to the seminary after going to Rome. I got ordained, and I had told my mentor that story, this priest. And so he went back to Rome and had the papal jewelers who make the rings for the popes and the cardinals make this ring for me by hand of St. Peter being crucified upside down to remind me what my vocation was for, to do everything I can with my life to strengthen my brothers and my sisters. I don't always wear it because it's bigger than Bishop Soto's, and I don't want him to get jelly, Although every now and then I'll go to his house for dinner and be like, Bishop, can you pass the water? It's right there. But that's what I would ask you to think about. Jesus, who says, I pray for you. And when you decide that you want to come to me, ask yourself the question, what's your life going to be like? What's the best thing you can do to strengthen the people who need you? And who are those people, by the way? And that's one of the best ways I can think about discernment. So a couple quick tips. What should one do if you want to figure out, let's say, if you should be a priest? I would say pray and talk to God. Where am I? What's going on with me? What do people say? And what is it that I'm wanting? I would say talk to your parents, talk to your family, talk to your pastor, but it's important to say out loud the things that we're thinking about so we can hear ourselves say it, and so we could also hear about ourselves from the people who know us. I would say get involved. I was an altar server, I was a Eucharistic minister, get to know the community in your parish. Let them love you. Let them be like, oh, this guy's cool. He's always here. This matters to him. Because we start to feel like, I matter too. This community cares that I'm spending my time in the parish. The church cares that I want to be here. That's an important thing to feel if you want to be a priest. Because one of the questions we ask when we're young is, are people going to care about me? I would say spend time with people who are more mature than you are. I had a spiritual director once who said, Mike, I want you to make friends with people who are more mature and wiser than you are. And I was like, where do those people live? You know what I mean? But it's been good advice for me. And then lastly, choose friends who are good for the best part of you. Again, when Jesus talks to his disciples, he says, I call you friends. If you want to hear God's voice in what's happening with you, in what people say, and what you want, choose friends who are good for the best part of you. And we know when our friendships aren't helping us there. You know what I mean? So that's what I think the Bible has to say about discernment. Those are some ideas that I have about how to do it, and a little bit about me and my own discernment process and why I'm a priest. So I don't want to put you guys to sleep or bore you out of your minds. I've shared some of my thoughts with you. I'd be curious to hear some of your thoughts or whatever your questions or comments might be. Who has something that we haven't already said? Thoughts, questions, comments? Does any of that make sense to you at all? You've had to suffer through lots of my homilies before, so you're used to this, right? You too? Yeah, you're used to suffering through it. Yeah. Yeah. The logic or the lack thereof. Well, Adam, the man, has made this decision that God is coming along and that he better hide himself because it wouldn't be good for him because of what he's done, and so God tries to explain himself, and God's question is, well, who told you that? The idea that somebody's been speaking to you and it isn't me, and really it was the serpent in a sense. But if discernment is a conversation that we're having with God, we've got to be aware that our lives are flooded with conversations, and learning to trust the deepest voice in our life is a hard thing, because a lot of times the voices in our lives tell us you should hide. So if discernment is a conversation with God, well, one of God's first questions is, well, who's telling you this? Who's telling you that you're naked? It wasn't me. In fact, I made you that way. That was the idea. Other thoughts, comments? It was just so clear that you have nothing to say. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. What would you say? That's why he's asking. Yeah. For me, a big part of that is spending time with people that I know love me. You know what I mean? I told you I can talk to 2,000 people in a shot, and one person says, that's a bunch of nonsense. And I feel like this. I feel so bad. When people say, like, oh my God, you're the most handsome priest we've ever seen, I'm like, yeah, that's right. I feel good. And when somebody's like, that fool, I feel awful. Like what other people say about you. And we love to be like, oh, I don't care. It doesn't faze me. But it's not true. What other people say about us is very, very powerful. It's powerful, It matters what people think about us. Maybe more than it should, but whatever, it matters. And what I do is when people say mean things about me, and they do all the time, actually, I talk to the people that I know love me. You know what I mean? People that I don't have to prove anything to. And even if these people were right, I really am the screw up that they say I am. It wouldn't matter, because these are people that I know love me anyway. And that's hopefully the conversation we learn to have with God too. When I pray, it's a God who says, doesn't change the way I think about you. I'll tell you this, in the biggest failure of my life, in my most humiliating moment, I talked to the priest who made this ring for me. And I said, Father, I don't know how to tell you this. I don't know how to tell you what happened. And he listened to the whole story, and it took me about an hour to get out a very simple story. He said, Mike, it just doesn't change the way that I think about you. Surround yourself with people you know love you. Other thoughts? You're just chilling. Anything else we should talk about while we're all here? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, there was a great poet by the name of Mary Oliver. She said, prayer, I don't know what that is, but I do know how to pay attention. Like, we go to church, we say our prayers, we have some idea about what God is asking of us and, you know, what the commandments are and the things that we've learned are good. And then we start to pay attention, like, you know, where are there conflicts in my life? What are the good things that I really long for, feel motivated by? I think that the Catholic tradition is really big on discussion with others, spiritual directors, wiser, more mature friends. Like, hey, let me run this by you. This is what I'm thinking. What I find myself doing with spiritual directees, what would you hope God would say? Like, if God could sit down in this chair next to you, what would you need to hear from God? And you know, God lives inside of you, and I would be surprised if he wasn't already saying the thing you most needed to hear. I would say start there, and conversation is a habit. You know, we tune in our radio dial by doing it over and over. Other thoughts? If not, I want to leave you with one image, a story from a vacation that I took. I was in France, in Paris, and I was going to take a river cruise in Germany and go to Switzerland. And so I got on this high-speed train in Paris, and I don't know any French, and if you've ever traveled in another country, Alejandro sabe eso, pues estar en otro país sin saber el idioma, la cultura, pues es terrible, ¿verdad? Con monstruos y todo eso. Yeah. So I was in, and I got on the train. It was this huge train station. And so I finally get on the train, and I'm trying to sit down in my seat, and I have my ticket, and I like plugged it in the window, those little round windows, and the ticket like slipped down, like, you know how the wall, and I was like, shoot. And I couldn't get it out. My ticket was gone. It was gone. And, you know, if I don't take this train, I'm not going to get on the boat. I'm not going to get on the cruise. I'm not going to make it to Switzerland. I'm not going to get home. Like, what do I do? And this conductor is coming down the aisle stamping all the tickets. And I was like, how do I even explain to this guy that my ticket's in the window? You know, and I don't speak French. So I was having that inner panic attack. And he got to me, and I was like, like trying to explain it. And he's all, hey, perfect English. He says, you don't need a ticket. And I remember that washing over me, the sense of relief. And I say that because when we talk about vocations, thinking now about priesthood, religious life, every one of us probably feels that I don't have a ticket. I mean, like, somebody's going to find out that I have this problem. Somebody's going to find out that I don't pray. Somebody's going to find out that I'm not holy enough or whatever. Somebody's going to find out that I don't have a ticket to be on the train. And what discernment is really about, if you ask me, is the discovery that God's not asking for a ticket from you. You have nothing to prove. Nobody's looking for your credentials. Nobody's saying you don't have what it takes, so you're not holy enough. Discernment is about accepting that that's true so that you can be free enough to do whatever it is God has for you to do. So I'd ask you to remember that. Padre Memo? Is there anything else I'm supposed to do? All right. Tell you about my story. Yeah, I could tell you, can we turn the recording off? Yeah, can we cut it? I'll tell you the real story.